All right. So what are the two ways? Well, first, we have already seen that God's usual way of operating is through secondary causes, and that primary causal gaps are God's extraordinary, unusual way of operating, and therefore, by definition, these primary actions of God will be few and far between.
So he makes a distinction there then between secondary causes, which is the way God usually works, and primary causes, which are really God's extraordinary, unusual way of working. So
Right.
secondary and primary. Primary, you might say, are miracles, whereas secondary are, the various laws of nature and that sort of thing, that the way God usually
Yeah.
operates. So he makes a distinction there.
Right. Or providence. That's what we call it. This is the way that it would have that history or whatever the event is lends itself out because of how God ordered the universe. So, even within the confines of theology, we have those two types of terms there. Well, second, the evidential or a sign value of a miraculous gap arises most naturally against a backdrop where the gaps are rare, unexpected, and have a religious context. And I think that last one is kind of almost the most important one, e.g., that these are positive theological reasons for their expected presence. Well, you have 600,000 men standing on the banks of the Red Sea, and just that wind comes at just the right time to move the water so that they can cross, and it just so happens to stop right before the Egyptian army can get to it, and therefore we know it has a natural cause if it even existed in the first place. Well,
All right.
except it has to have this religious context of why those 600 men were standing there and why at that particular time and why those particular people. That might have been the case that this area had good reasons for flooding and unflooding. I mean, that's probably true of any water body. Or how about the resurrection? Well, it just so happened to be in a world where anything can happen. Of course, you're going to expect life to come from non-life, and so why not a dead person coming back to life? Well, except it's in the context of someone who said, because of who I am, I'm going to raise myself from the dead. Well, that even puts more variables into it. The person who's shuffling the 52 card deck is going to tell you that he is, without any sleight of hand movement, is going to deal the best poker hand 5 different times. Well, you just have to assume that each one of those times will happen just from the nature of it. Now, it's highly improbable, but it is still possible. And so he's not cheating, right? It has to be the case that, he's just doing it. Or you have to assume he's either lying or that he's able to kind of produce this shuffling, and whether or not that's a different question. But again, then you're going into a realm of bringing in the idea of explanations there and evaluating.
All right, so gaps due to primary divine agencies are miracles that are in the minority because of these reasons. First, it's not how God usually works, right? It's primary instead of the secondary causes that God usually uses. And secondly, there are religious contexts, right? Okay, so he's working his way through this whole idea of the God of the gaps problem, right? So he says, fourth, then the distinction between empirical and historical science is helpful for understanding the God of
Right.
the
Yeah.
problem. Empirical science, he tells us, is a non-historical approach to the world that focuses on repeatable, regularly occurring events or patterns in nature, i.e., the relationship between pressure and temperature and volume in a gas, those types of things. So that's empirical science. It's non-historical. It's something that's repeatable, that, we think test tube, right, kind of thing. And then by contrast, he says historical science focuses on past singularities, right, that are not repeatable, right? Think of, the origin of the universe, the first life, the origin of various kinds of life, and so forth. And so he says advocates of this distinction between the empirical and the historical with regard to science claim that appealing to God's primary causal activity is legitimate in historical science, even if not in empirical science, because the former deals with cases where, theologically speaking, God's primary causal activity is to be found, while the latter, right, deals with God's secondary causal activity. So we can make that distinction, and we can see then this distinction between empirical and historical, and they both have different kinds of explanations associated with them, is the point he's trying to make here.
Right. Well, fifth, according to intelligent design advocates, one can use science to discover the products of intelligent design without having any idea how those products came about. For example, an archaeologist can know that an artifact he discovers was intelligently designed to be used in religious activities, even though he had no idea how the artifact was made. Let's just talk about crystal skulls and not the terrible Indiana Jones movie. I mean, there it's intelligently designed. We don't know how. It's carved against the grain, but it's smooth.
We
And
don't know who, right? Who did
right,
it?
right. So therefore, it just it tumbled in a little rock preserve until it only appears to be a skull, and it's made of this crystal material.
Right. And
No,
so his
that
point here is that, intelligence needs to be part of our repertoire of explanations when it comes to phenomena we're attempting to explain, right? And to throw it out is kind of arbitrary. It doesn't even make sense.
right,
We can use all the tools that we have to help us to explain what's going on. And intelligence can be one of them. And he's suggesting, well, you don't have to say it's even God, but we do use intelligence to help us explain various phenomena, right? And so why throw it out is the point he's trying to
right.
make. All right, well, he says finally, intelligent design theory differs from any form of creation science in this way. First, creation science proponents use biblical data to form theories and then attempt to test them empirically. So what he's doing is drawing a distinction between creation science on the one hand and intelligent design theory on the other, right? So he suggests that there is a distinction there. So what is it? Well, creation science uses biblical data to form theories and attempts to test them empirically. Intelligent design theory, on the other hand, he tells us, makes no reference to a sacred text like the Bible or to theological teachings. Instead, by using the intelligent design filter, which we mentioned earlier, intelligent design advocates believe that they can and have discovered scientific data that is best explained by an intelligent designer. Things like the origin of the universe, the origin of life, consciousness, causes of irreducible complexity, and so forth. He says it is the use of scientific evidence and the scientifically employed design filter, not biblical or theological teaching, that distinguishes, he tells us, between intelligent design from creation science. So he wants us to understand that there is a distinction here. He said it would seem then that the God of the Gaps charge is inadequate to motivate an abandonment of intelligent design and return to methodological naturalism. So this chapter then has been his kind of critique of methodological naturalism with regard to the only explanatory way that we have. And again, it's a kind of secondary critique of scientism, is what he's getting at here.
Right. Right. And so, you can still be a creationist and intelligent designer and then, still reject methodological naturalism there. So, yeah.